Good evening, everyone. It's the Herald Sport in Stuttgart, the day after Scotland won, Switzerland won. We're going to look back in a little bit more depth at what was a pretty good night for Scotland in tournament terms, all things considered, as they kept their hopes of making it out the group stage of a major tournament for the first time alive in Germany. Johnny McFarlane and Gaby Mackay with me. We've headed down from Cologne a couple hours on the train today. Johnny, I'll come to you first. We were there last night. The atmosphere was incredible. Scotland needed to respond. Thankfully, they did after the disappointment of the opening day against Germany. We discussed it briefly on the podcast last night, but a brief summary is it was refreshing to watch Scotland, remembering they are quite good at some things, and we have this habit, I think, in a footballing aspect as well of always adapting to the opponent, always maybe playing against the ball. But last night, I thought Scotland probably deserved to win if there was going to be a winner on the night. And Steve Clarke needed a performance. He was asked before the game, is this the biggest game of your international career? Now it's not. The Hungary game is, but that is exactly what he'd have wanted heading to Cologne last night.
Yeah, of course, if you had the option to take this at the start of the tournament, you would have absolutely snapped someone's hand off for it, because you're going up against the weakest team in the group with the opportunity to know that if you win, that's it. You're almost certainly through. The idea that anyone with 4 points wouldn't get through just seems like a mathematical uncertainty. Now, this is Scotland, so we never know, but I think even now, with the way the groups are settling down, that looks pretty unlikely. So it seems that Scotland winning will put them into the next round. And that would be a phenomenal opportunity. That's a phenomenal opportunity. It would be a phenomenal result, given that since 1954, when I think Scotland first qualified for a World Cup, no team has ever reached the knockout stage. So it's a very lengthy amount of time, 70 years and counting. And we all want to see Scotland do something. And that would, I think, unite the nation in a way that would be quite tangible. Very exciting to see the reaction to that. But they've got a massive game. And if I'm honest, in my heart of hearts, Josh, I always kind of felt like tactically the Switzerland game might be the one that Scotland, it was a good kind of, it was almost a good clash for them in terms of the clash of styles. I think Hungary are going to pose a major problem in terms of the skill set they have, the way they play, and the questions that they'll pose. Scotland can't get ahead of themselves now and think everything's rosy in the garden again and produce another performance like what they did against Germany, because if they do that, they're going to be getting a rude awakening. I don't think the nation's in the mood to accept another performance like they did in Munich.
Agreed. Right, let's talk about you were at the fan zone, Gaby. There have been, and anyone in Germany will know this, there's a lot of Scottish people here, isn't there? And I think just from a human point of view, when Scotland scored that goal last night, and you sensed it as well with the national anthem, which was so loud, there's so many people here that are at a major tournament, obviously following Scotland for the first time, and it would have been just so bad had they gone home without a moment. If Scotland had lost 1-0 last night, or if they hadn't scored an opening goal, or if the result had effectively put them out, then it would have been just not fair for the amount of Scotland fans that have travelled over. You were watching it in the fan zone, we were at the stadium. What kind of sense have you got being around Scotland fans over these past couple of weeks? Because it has been unique, and we thought Johnny and I, speaking on the way up to Cologne, we were saying, okay, it'll be busy, but it won't quite be Munich levels of busy. And then walking through Cologne city centre on Wednesday yesterday morning, we were kind of proved wrong, because it felt just as busy. There was a few unnerved walking tours full of tourists who were going to see the Cologne Cathedral, and it was probably the worst day of the year to go and do that. But it was important that Scotland fans had that moment, and now again the anticipation can build ahead of the game on Sunday.
Yeah, I think just first of all on the crowds, I think we were all there when we were in sort of the main square where the fan zone is. The day before, when the fan zone got cancelled, someone was having a wedding, and the backdrop was just all these people in kilts. But I think what you say is absolutely right about having that moment. I mean, I was in the fan zone last night, as you can imagine. It went crazy, and I think that's kind of the thing. And the piece I did from the fan zone, I'm like, look, whatever happens, at least we got that moment. At least the fans, that however many it is, 200,000, some people say, at least they travelled. At least you always have that moment. If it had been a defeat last night, 2-0, you're out of the tournament. And then even if you score in the Hungary game, it doesn't mean anything, you know. So it was good to have that moment of excitement. I would just say I'm disappointed to have to pick Johnny up that he said that Hungary would cause major problems. He could have said they would have caused Magyar problems. He didn't. I'm very disappointed in that.
Nowhere near as witty. Nowhere near witty enough to come up with that, Jamie. That's too much.
But yeah, to get back to the point, it was the atmosphere was great last night. I mean, people will probably be aware they actually had 3 separate fan zones. They had a larger one across the Rhine. They had the one that I was at in the city centre, and they actually had to set up one sort of on the banks of the Rhine, but on the same side of the city centre, for just specifically for Scotland fans, because the demand was just so great, which just shows you, you know, the numbers that the Tottenham have been travelling in.
Yeah, there's been a lot of them. Let's speak a little bit about the game before we look ahead to the Hungary game. Billy Gilmour was the shock, I guess, disclusion from the opening game against Germany, and there was no surprise that he was put back into the starting 11 by Steve Clarke against Germany. I thought, and I said this on last night's podcast with Matty, it wasn't Billy Gilmour's best game for Scotland where you think this is exactly why he is, I would say, the most promising player the country has at the moment, and probably the best technical player that Scotland have in their current squad. But he just improves the level. If you want to keep the ball, play your player who's best with the ball at their feet. He improves people around him. He takes the ball in difficult situations, and that there's no coincidence that Scotland didn't panic as much, even though their plan was clearly to try and play through Switzerland a little bit more. There wasn't that, I guess, rashness on the ball that we saw against Germany. Gilmour's ability to, even sometimes when he's taking the ball in not in the most glamorous areas, it's not as if he's always taking the ball and going through the lines himself, but he's taking the ball, he's provoking the press sometimes, which creates space elsewhere. And for me, not only was it a coincidence, Johnny, that Scotland kept the ball better with Gilmour in the side, but it was no coincidence that they were able to create a bit more space for the likes of McGinn and McTominay and Adams in the front line, because Switzerland were pressing more, because they knew of the areas Gilmour was kind of getting on the ball and deeper on the pitch. And I thought he had a really good game next to Cal McGregor in the middle.
Yeah, no, he was absolutely excellent. I spoke to Callum McGregor in the mix zone after the game, and he said that he prefers to play alongside Billy Gilmour, and he didn't have to say that, but he made it quite pointedly that he's the guy he wants next to him. And you can understand why, because the pair of them, I think Callum McGregor used the terminology, we can knit the game together when we're playing together because we keep the ball. And that's absolutely the case. You've got 2 guys who are really comfortable, who can go past the man if they need to get out of trouble. They can carry it. But probably the best part of their game is obviously just the ability to recycle, the ability to take it one touch or no touches at all and play it back. You saw, unfortunately, in the goal, where I'm sure we'll come on to this, the situation with Tony Ralston, but Gilmour's actually given a hospital pass by Grant Hanley, and there was a few of those, wasn't there? There was a few of those, and Gilmour still manages to get out of trouble and give the ball to Ralston. Now, I don't think Ralston has any excuse for that. It's just sloppy, but it's an example of that specific moment. Is an example of how Billy Gilmour gets you out of trouble as a team. And listen, I said it in the podcast last night that it's not actually available anymore because the sound was so bad because Joshua messed it up. But fundamentally, international football, I've always been told, and I've always believed since I was told it, it's about holding on to the ball, because you don't have the same level of energy and cohesion that you do around club football, because there isn't that day-to-day coaching and drilling into the exacting detail that you have in the club game. So having somebody that can just take the sting out of the game, control it, and set the tempo to some extent is invaluable. And I think we've seen that with Billy Gilmour. I'd love to understand exactly what Steve Clarke was trying to do in the Germany game, because whatever he was trying to do, he failed spectacularly. And, you know, I just think any Scotland team without Billy Gilmour is a team that's massively diminished. And this is not me speaking after the fact. If you look at my Twitter, and I think you two are the same, I think both you felt like Billy Gilmour should start, and I think most of the nation felt Billy Gilmour should start against Germany. People were saying pretty much en masse, like, why would you not play Gilmour? Ryan Christie has his strengths, but he's not that metronomic presence that Gilmour is. He's not that generational talent that almost doesn't look like a Scottish player. So I thought he was really, really good. I know what you're saying about him not having he wasn't 9 out of 10, I think he was a really solid 7 or 8 and kept the ball moving. And you saw Billy Gilmore's best qualities in the lead up to the goal, because without Billy Gilmore, that goal doesn't happen. He takes the ball in a super tight position and manages to manipulate it out into space. And that's what opens up that one touch. I think it's with his chest and then with his foot. That one movement opens up the team. And that's what leads to the goal.
Yeah, agree. Good description of that, because you're right. It isn't a line breaking pass that he plays, or something that you maybe notice watching it back, but it is the fact that instead of trying to boot it for territory, he tries to pick out a pass. We've got to talk about the goal that Scotland conceded, KB, which was not very good. Thought Ralston had a difficult game. To be fair, he recovered somewhat in the second half. Still don't think it was a good performance. It's just a reminder for me of the fact that you've referenced it in recent podcasts. When you're a nation as small as Scotland, you probably can't afford to have your two best players out in one position when you're heading into a major tournament. The absence of Aaron Hickey and Nathan Patterson was a worry heading into the tournament, and last night that did come to pass. Because let's not also beat around the bush. Scotland could have won last night, and you might say, oh well, if they'd went and played for a draw against Hungary, it might have been a bit more precarious. That's a very Scottish attitude to have. They also could have won, and maybe there's a slight tinge of regret today about that. And one of the reasons they didn't win was because Switzerland were so dominant on that left-hand side. I'm not just talking about the goal and the way that Ralston, for whatever reason, wasn't able to open up and get down the line, and he was always going inside into the positions that Switzerland wanted him to for the Shaqiri moment. But also that second half, there was 3 or 4 moments where you got beaten one-on-one and a shot flash just wide. So talk us through that goal from your perspective that Scotland conceded, but also, does Clark have any options to change it? Because we know we've spoken about the fact that James Forrest could potentially play right wing back. I don't think he's going to start there against Hungary. Ross McCrory's only played 1 game for Scotland. Clark hasn't got many people to turn to in that position, and ultimately that is the reason that Ralston has become first choice for this tournament.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, I think, and I'll sort of come on to it. I mean, there's obviously no excuse for Ralston on that goal, but yeah, the fundamental fact is he's just not quite up to this level. He's just playing against players who are better than him, which isn't necessarily his fault. It goes back to what you said, that Hickey's out, Patterson's out. He's at best third choice for that role, and he's just unfortunately not quite good enough. As Johnny rightly said, I think that the goal comes initially from Grant Hanley giving Gilmore a hospital pass, and he's got the technical quality to sort of manage to sort of poke it away, give it to Ralston, take the pressure off. But by then, the press has been triggered, and Ralston doesn't have the technical quality that Billy Gilmore has. He puts it in a really awful area, and unfortunately, it's Shaqiri it falls to, who now, okay, maybe past his best, he may be playing in MLS and not particularly well for Chicago Fire, but he's still got that left foot, and you just, I mean, the minute he hit it, you just had to go, I mean, fair enough. That's, to go back to Tony Ralston, if he does that for Celtic against St Johnstone, that ball isn't going in the top corner. If you do it against Switzerland and you play that ball to Xherdan Shaqiri, yeah, that's probably going to happen. It's going to go in the top corner. So I think it absolutely does come down to that. And you spoke a little bit about making changes for the game going forward, but again, who else is there? So James Forrest, a little bit more attacking. You think at a game against Hungary where we absolutely have to win, no question about that he'd be good, but I don't think he can play right wing back for 90 minutes at this point in his career. And I mean, there'd be concerns about his defensive contribution anyway, but I'm not sure he can play 90 minutes at right wing back at the age he is, when he's coming off a season with Celtic where he finished the season really strongly, which I think is probably what got him into the squad. But let's not forget, he didn't actually play that much for Celtic during the season. And then Ross McCrory as well. He's, as you said, he's got 1 cap for Scotland. Right wing back isn't necessarily his natural position, and with all due respect to him, I think he's probably in the same boat as Ralston, where he's just probably not quite up to that level.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And actually, if you look at, we've got a piece on the website, at the Herald website, coming about this tomorrow, but if you look at how Clark, I think, what he changed tactically from the opening game, one of the things he did is you saw Ralston push right up into the top line when Scotland had the ball and were building up. And that did 2 things. It mitigated the fact that what you saw with the goal, that's probably not a strength, building up deep in the pitch. But also he is big enough to be an aerial target. And I think it is important to stress that he did recover in the game. And although people went past him in the second half, Andy Robertson went out of his way to try and build him up after the game, and it must be a really difficult, lonely place when you've been at fault for conceding that goal, and you've been at fault for conceding that goal in a Scotland shirt in a major tournament when everyone knows that the history and the pressures that surround getting out of a group. But I just wonder if it's going to be a case of looking at specifically why he got into those situations where he was forced backwards, because it was so obvious at the game, and trying to get him high as much as possible. So again, you are mitigating that weakness and trying to I guess push the Switzerland defence backwards, because I thought, especially compared to the Germany game, Scotland just seemed so much better set up to get a foothold in the game. Johnny, other big players before we move on from the game, McGinn and McTominay, especially in the second half. John McGinn, they both looked much more like themselves as well. And we've not had that type of level of Scotland performance in a big game in a while. And obviously, there's been a lot of friendlies. It's hard to judge, etc., all the usual caveats. The Scott McTominay goal, which we referenced last night, that is trademark Steve Clarke Scotland, isn't it? And again, it's playing to your strengths. A technical ball in midfield from Billy Gilmore. Surging runs down the left, an overlap this time from McGregor, not Tierney, and McTominay, where he always seems to be for Scotland, often on his left foot, which is scoring from a cutback, even if there was a fairly generous deflection this time round.
Yeah, I thought McTominay in general was fantastic in the game, looking much more like himself after a really subdued set of performances in the friendlies and then in the Germany game. You know, he's such a weapon because of his physical power and his size and that galloping sensibility that he has, where he can just cut right through teams. And we know he's got a wicked shot as well. I'd love to see again the volley that he had. Maybe everyone at home has kind of seen this back, but that to me in the stadium looked like it was flying towards the top corner before it was deflected away. But that shows you how dangerous he is. And I thought in and around the box, he was really impressive when he got the opportunity in terms of the runs he was making, and you know, he did a power of work for the team as well. John McGinn, I think, hasn't really generally shown up in this tournament. I think he was good in the last 30 minutes, and he got himself into a few situations where he was able to shield the ball, use that big backside of his, and get some positive outcomes. But generally, across the two games, I think you've probably seen 150 minutes of anonymous McGinn and 30 minutes of John McGinn looking like he can. Certainly not living up to the bill in the Tartan Army are giving him everywhere you go. Listen, I'm one of these guys. I still remain unconvinced by the John McGinn loving. I think he's done brilliantly in terms of goal scoring for Scotland, but I find him a tactically frustrating player because he's got all these gifts, but I still feel like you're never quite sure what position he's going to be in at any given time. You have to sort of go with the flow with him a little bit, because he's someone that likes to go wherever the wind's taking him, and sometimes that can mean a little bit of structural instability on the back of that. Clarke, I think, has done well to create a system that allows for that, but at the same time, I think you're kind of mitigating and losing out on the width that you would have if that was a more naturally a wide player who could come in inside and out. So given that that's the case, I think what you're looking for with John McGinn is to provide moments, and he has done that in his Scotland career. There's no doubt about that. But I think they need more from him. They need more from a guy who's been such a big figure for an Aston Villa side that's in the top four. And you've got to hope against Hungary he can really, really stand tall and give one of those kind of performances that even haters like me know that he's capable of in his best moments. So I think the pair of them, I think overall can be pretty happy with how the game's panned out. Like I say, but for me, the two players that kind of really set the tone of Scotland were Cal McGregor, who I thought was magnificent, and Billy Gilmore alongside him. I think those were the two major successes in the midfield.
Yeah, okay. I mean, McGinn's I agree. I think he's been great. I thought he was. I thought he was a 7 last night. For me, the best part of his game for Scotland is, and you're right. I mean, Clarke does not have a balanced squad, and that is sometimes reflected in the fact that the team lacks balance, especially on the right hand side. But McGinn's best attribute for me is that he can get you through a press in a different ways, a bit of a target, effectively a bit of a target player, and you saw that with the way that he lined up in the last line for Scotland last night. But it can do a lot of things. A big game, of course, for him against Hungary. Other player I wanted to talk about, Gaby, was Angus Gunn, who faced a lot of criticism after conceding 5 goals as a goalkeeper, as probably always going to if you're picking the ball of your net 5 times. He made 2 really important saves for Scotland, and another thing that's probably for me been a little bit it's not been acknowledged enough. He's off his line more than almost any goalkeeper I've seen in this tournament, because I think it's a reflection of the fact that Clark does want to be aggressive in his own right. He does want to play with a high line. And especially now with Kieran Tierney out of the picture, you don't have tons of recovery pace across your 3 centre backs. Gunn is probably swept up a dangerous attack in behind, I would say, 7 or 8 times across those 2 games, and he did make those 2 important stops to bounce back from. Even if his performance wasn't objectively bad, it's still difficult if you concede 5 goals in the opening game of a tournament, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is, and I think particularly in that first half where he had a couple. I mean, he'd one very good save in the first half, and then one that you'd expect him to make. But it's probably one of those that, as a goalkeeper, you're almost glad to be facing that, because it's good to get those saves under your belt. Because I can imagine for him, it must have been a really difficult one on Friday, the game, and then the aftermath, when obviously he came in for a lot of criticism. So, some of it warranted, some of it perhaps less warranted. I mean, obviously with a piece on the website with David Priest this week, sort of analysing it, which people can go and read. But I think for him in that first half to get those 2 saves under his belt, that probably, settled whatever nerves he might have had down. And I think it's a very crucial thing, what you say, that there were 2 Switzerland goals disallowed for offside last night, which is sort of a reflection of the fact Scotland were playing a high line and relying on Gunn to come out and sweep up those things. Now, the second disallowed goal for offside, okay, the boy got to it, dinked it over him and scored. The offside trap had done its job. But I think it's something that people wouldn't necessarily think about with goalkeepers. You just think about the saves, and if they come off the line and clear it into the stand or clear it up the pitch, it's not necessarily something that you would think about. But I think it really was evident last night that he had a really crucial role there in getting Scotland far higher up the park, because against Germany, I mean, we all watched it. They were camped on the edge of their own box the whole time. Incidentally, with a big space in between the midfield and defence, which Germany just got a lot of joy from and fired a couple past Gunn. So I think for him last night, I'm not sure he necessarily needed a quote unquote redemption. I mean, I think Scotland lost 5-1. It's not only going to be the goalkeeper's fault, but I think for him to have, as you say, those, I mean, particularly the second half where he just got that slightest touch on it, was going in the corner and it just goes very, very slightly wide. For him to have those moments, I think, is a really big thing for him.
Yeah, John, just as we kind of close, looking ahead to the Hungary game, and obviously we'll be live over the next couple of days for what is a big game. That is a cliche, but it is a big game, isn't it? Anything else that stands out to you in terms of what needs to be different for Scotland? They didn't create an abundance of chances. They kind of scored off the back of a mistake and conceded off the back of a mistake. It's going to be tight against Hungary, and Kieran Tierney's absence, which hasn't been talked about that much, I think, over the last day, because people are excited that the Euros qualification is still a possibility. Scotland don't have a great record without Tierney. There's a question about, I don't think they will, but there's a question about, do they change their system, given this system is so clearly designed to accommodate the unique fact of having 2 left backs? I mean, talk to me a little bit about his absence, and also what, if anything, you think needs to be different as we continue to build up to the Hungary game.
Yeah, his absence is huge. There's no doubt about that, because he gives you that driving force from left side of centre back. He can bring the ball out. He can underlap Andy Robertson, which we know and have seen is a danger for teams. He can go on the outside of Andy Robertson. Sometimes he makes those runs as well, and that can be effective. Scotland have a world-class left flank in this setup, and now they don't. Now, Andy Robertson, by the way, I thought was outstanding and led from the front as a captain in the game last night. But Kieran Tierney's a loss no matter how you cut it. We're just not a big enough nation. We don't have a good enough squad whereby someone like that dropping out isn't going to be felt. In terms of the overall, Joshua, I think the big problem with this side is the one that you identified with Gaby earlier on, and I didn't get a chance to come in, and I think it's the most important thing at the moment, is the right-hand side. Because Scotland just become incredibly lopsided. And I think that'll still be the case with Andy Robertson there, because Andy Robertson is a genuinely top drawer elite player. And teams like Hungary will know that he's a threat. So what they'll do is they'll say, well, we want to try and encourage Scotland to play out through Ralston, through his side. So I would definitely, if I was Clark, I would play James Forrest. I don't think Ross McCrory is a viable option. Don't think right wing back is his natural position. He can do it, but he's a big sort of galumphing, powerful, physical lad. He's going to be honest and he's going to give you, a 6 out of 10. But I don't really see much difference between him and Tony Ralston. What James Forrest will give you is a big player mentality, someone who knows where the goal is, someone who works hard for the team. We're not talking about a winger here who abandons the principles of the team or the principles of the manager. He's someone that can do the dirty work. And I would be highly tempted just to roll the dice on that, because I then believe you've got twin threat. You've got on the left and you've got on the right, and you can get in behind two ways. I don't think Tony Ralston is a much better defender than him. So I would look upon it as the big problem with Forrest is if he's targeting back post, if he's trying to defend back post situations, obviously Ralston's got the edge in that regard. If we're talking about aerial balls, but if you're talking on one-on-one defending on the deck, I think Forrest can sort that out. But crucially, in a game that you have to win, he gives you that little edge. Now, regardless of who Clark picks, I think Forrest is going to get some game time in that slot. I think there'll come a point in the game, unless Scotland are comfortable or unless Scotland are ahead and Clark's looking to kind of ease the game out or manage the game, I think you're going to see James Forrest at some point, because I think he's going to be needed to break that team down.
Okay, and finally, Gaby, for you, are you on the James Forrest on the right wing back role train? That's what I'll call it. I mean, my point of view is, I understand the point, because you look at, okay, do the positives outweigh the negatives? And last night, from Ralston's point of view, I don't think the defensive positives, well, certainly for the goal, outweighed the negatives of will he be targeted at the back post. I also look at the fact that Scotland do fall into a back five and they do only have one player out wide. And if you look at the positions he was put in 4, 5, 6 times, okay, he got someone went past him on a lot of those occasions, but do you want James Forrest as your playing in a right back position and falling back there? I'm not so sure. I don't think Clark will. I think Clark might play the exact same team, just because understandably you'll think, okay, bar one or two without Tierney. Sorry, yeah, McKenna. I just think changing system, as much as that could make sense, is he going to do it when you've not got much time? When this, Scott McKenna has played that role as well. How do you see it? And would you make changes, bar that obvious one, which is going to probably be McKenna and for Tierney?
No, I think if you look at, we've sort of seen bits of Hungary in the first 2 games and over the last 2 years. I think if you go into this game, it's probably going to be a tight game. It's probably going to be, probably quite a boring game for long spells. Hungary, in a lot of ways, are a similar team to Scotland. They've got a really good spine of the team with Soboslai, obviously, Shaloi up front, Orban at the back, Gulashi in goal. But, much like Scotland, they don't necessarily have huge strength and depth. So I think specifically on the James Forrest thing, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I'm not sure he can play 90 minutes playing at right wing back. So I think that's one where, if you're expecting it to be a tight game, if you get to 6 minutes and it's 0-0 and we know that Scotland need to win and the Hungary are basically already out, maybe that's when you put Forrest on that right-hand side, if you don't want to change the shape at that point to go at them. I think, much as you said, I imagine apart from Tierney, I imagine McKenna will come in from Tierney. I mean, as we've sort of alluded to earlier, I know that there is talk of changing the shape. I'd imagine if you've gone into the first 2 games playing with a 3 at the back for the most important game so far, are you going to switch to a 4? Probably not. I mean, maybe you could argue it would give you the element of surprise over Hungary, but I'd imagine you'll stick with that and it'll just be McKenna comes in. Now that he doesn't give you what Tierney gives you going forward, that will, I'd imagine, present something of a problem, as you sort of alluded to, as I think you both alluded to. Scotland don't look the same team without Kieran Tierney in there, but I think, knowing Clark as we all do, I think he'll probably go for a broadly similar team, probably just with McKenna in there, and he'll be quite happy if we get to an hour and it's 0-0 And then at that point, you can start putting on guys like Forrest, guys like Shankland, guys who might make the difference against a Hungarian team, which obviously will be up for the game. I mean, they're sort of in the nightmare position that we thought that Scotland would be, where they've come to a major tournament with quite a lot of expectation on them, and after 2 games, they're basically already going home. So I'm sure they'll be up for it because they won't want to go home and, you know, having disappointed their fans in that way. They'll want to give their fans that moment, basically, that Scotland had last night. But I think as the game goes on, Hungary having nothing to play for, if you make those changes, if it's 0-0 after an hour and bring them on, that might be where you see the game sort of go in Scotland's favour.
We'll hope and we'll see. We're going to leave it there. We'll be back over the next couple of days as we continue to build up to the big one in Stuttgart. Stay with us over the next couple of days. We'll be in and around the city, so do come and say hi if you see us, and then at the press conference on Saturday as we preview the game on Sunday. Until then, thanks for watching, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.